A buried truth was teetering on the edge of discovery, threatening to upend lives and lay bare carefully concealed secrets. James Thomas, the brilliant yet methodical CEO of Joint Stock, believed he had meticulously managed every corner of his existence. But a single warning, softly delivered by a young nurse, would fracture his carefully constructed world and set into motion a cascade of revelations he never anticipated. Her whispered words would uncover a corporate conspiracy woven with threads of long-hidden family truths. Confronted by betrayal within his trusted circle and the startling identity of the mysterious nurse, James stood at a pivotal juncture where the lines between past and present blurred. As he delved into a desperate search to shield his legacy and untangle the depths of deception, one unsettling reality emerged: everything he thought he knew was a lie. The stakes had never been higher, the risks never greater. The steady rhythm of beeping monitors filled the sterile air of the hospital room. James Thomas slowly opened his eyes, the sharp fluorescent light reflecting off the pristine white ceiling above him. Reality sank in a harsh reminder of his present state and its sobering cause. At 57, the celebrated CEO of Joint Stock had faced countless challenges, but nothing had prepared him for the heart attack that nearly claimed his life. His body protested as sensation returned, a dull ache radiating from his chest. He shifted slightly, and the stiff, sanitized sheets rustled beneath him. The subtle sound drew the attention of a young nurse, who had been silently monitoring his vitals nearby. "Mr. Thomas, you're awake," she said, her voice gentle yet steady. Her presence was calming, her brown eyes warm and inviting. There was something faintly familiar about her, though James couldn't quite place it. The badge on her uniform identified her as Ashley. "How do you feel?" Ashley asked, her tone laced with concern. James blinked at her, his gaze sharpening. Her soft expression didn't entirely mask an air of determination. "Like I've been run over," he replied, his voice scratchy from disuse. "How long have I been here?" Ashley glanced at the clipboard in her hands. 3 days, she informed him, her voice calm but firm. "You've had everyone worried." James' brows lifted in alarm. 3 days, he repeated, his voice edged with urgency. "I can't stay here. There's a crucial board meeting I need to attend." As he attempted to sit upright, a sharp, searing pain jolted through his chest. He gasped, instinctively clutching at his side, the color draining from his face. Before he could move further, Ashley was at his side, her hands gently pressing him back into the pillows. "Mr. Thomas, you need to rest," she insisted, her tone unwavering but filled with genuine compassion. "Your body has endured a severe trauma. Pushing yourself now could jeopardize your recovery." Her words were measured, but her earnest gaze caught him off guard. He wasn't accustomed to being spoken to so directly, let alone being cared for with such sincerity. For the first time in years, James felt an unfamiliar, disconcerting vulnerability. And yet, in Ashley's calm demeanor, he saw a spark of something else, something that would soon force him to question everything he thought he knew. James Thomas felt an unexplainable connection to the young nurse by his side. Something about her presence set him at ease, despite the restless urgency gnawing at his mind about Joint Stock. Against all odds, her calm demeanor seemed to soothe the ever-present tension within him. "The meeting," he pressed, though his tone had softened. "It's critical for my company's future. I need to be there." Ashley Thomas hesitated, her lips tightening as if she were battling an internal conflict. Her eyes darted toward the door briefly before she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. "Mr. Thomas, I don't think you should go to that meeting." James narrowed his eyes, confusion mingling with his growing frustration. "Why would you say that?" Ashley glanced around nervously, ensuring no one else was within earshot. When she turned back to him, her expression was both earnest and anxious. "I can't explain everything right now," she said softly, "but please trust me. It's not safe for you to attend." Before James could respond or press for more answers, the door opened abruptly, and Dr. Patel entered the room, clipboard in hand, his confident stride a stark contrast to the tension lingering between James and Ashley. Ashley straightened immediately, her demeanor shifting back to that of a professional nurse. Her face betrayed nothing, though James noticed she avoided meeting his gaze. "Ah, Mr. Thomas," Dr. Patel said warmly. "It's good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" As the doctor began his assessment, James's mind churned with questions. What could Ashley have meant? Why would it be dangerous for him to attend a routine board meeting? Her cryptic warning gnawed at him, but he forced himself to concentrate on Dr. Patel's words. "Your vitals are improving steadily," the doctor said, flipping through the notes on his clipboard. "The medications are stabilizing your condition, but there's still work to do. You'll need to make significant lifestyle adjustments to avoid another episode." James nodded absently, his attention straying back to Ashley. She was meticulously adjusting his IV, her movements deliberate, her expression focused on the task at hand. Her silence spoke volumes, as if she were guarding secrets too heavy to share. "When can I leave?" James asked, turning back to Dr. Patel, though his tone carried an edge of impatience. James Thomas, the commanding and calculated CEO of Joint Stock, felt an unusual connection to the nurse standing beside him. Something about her presence offered a rare sense of comfort, despite the mounting tension over the responsibilities waiting beyond the hospital walls. Her calm demeanor, juxtaposed with his urgency, intrigued him. "The meeting," James insisted, though his voice had lost some of its sharpness. "It's critical for the future of my company. I need to be there." Ashley Thomas hesitated, her lips tightening as if suppressing words she wasn't ready to say. Her gaze flickered toward the door before she leaned closer, lowering her voice to barely a whisper. "Mr. Thomas," she began cautiously, "I really think you should reconsider attending that meeting." James's brow furrowed deeply, the hint of a warning in her tone tugging at his curiosity. "Why would you say that?" Ashley glanced around the room, ensuring they were alone, before meeting his gaze with a mix of urgency and anxiety. "I can't explain everything right now," she admitted, her voice almost trembling. "But something isn't right. Please, trust me, it's not safe for you to go." Before James could question her further, the door swung open, and Dr. Patel strode in with his clipboard in hand, his demeanor brisk but reassuring. Ashley instantly straightened, her professional mask firmly back in place, though James noticed how she avoided his gaze entirely. "Ah, Mr. Thomas," Dr. Patel greeted warmly. "It's good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" As the doctor performed his routine checks, James's mind swirled with unanswered questions. What had Ashley meant? Why would a seemingly routine board meeting carry any sort of threat? Yet, he forced himself to focus on the doctor's words. "Your recovery is progressing well," Dr. Patel noted, his tone calm but firm. "However, you'll need to make significant adjustments to your lifestyle to ensure this doesn't happen again." "When can I leave?" James asked, his tone tinged with impatience as he dismissed the doctor's cautions. Dr. Patel hesitated before responding. "Ideally, we'd like to keep you here another day or two for observation." "I can't stay that long," James interjected, his voice firm with authority. "There are urgent matters waiting for me at Joint Stock." The doctor sighed, clearly accustomed to dealing with headstrong patients. "Mr. Thomas, I strongly advise against pushing yourself too soon. Your health must come first." James's expression hardened, the determination in his eyes unmistakable. He was a man who didn't back down from his decisions. "I understand your concerns," Dr. James said, his tone measured, "but I feel much better, and I'll adhere to any outpatient regimen you recommend. Start the discharge process." Dr. Patel exchanged a glance with Ashley, whose eyes reflected a quiet worry, before relenting. "Very well, Mr. Thomas, but please take it easy. No strenuous activities, avoid stress, and follow up with your physician soon." As the doctor left to arrange the paperwork, Ashley moved closer to James's bedside, her face marked by a mix of concern and trepidation. "Mr. Thomas," she said softly, "I know this isn't my place, but please reconsider. I have a bad feeling about this meeting. Something feels off." James studied her closely, sensing a genuine worry in her words. "Ashley, I appreciate your concern," he replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "But this meeting is vital to the future of my company. I've worked too hard to let anything jeopardize it." Ashley hesitated, as though she wanted to argue further, but instead she nodded reluctantly and helped him prepare for his discharge. As James changed from the hospital gown back into his tailored suit, Ashley's warning lingered in his mind. His instincts, honed by years of navigating high-stakes business, screamed that something wasn't right. Yet he chose to push the thoughts aside. His responsibilities demanded his focus, not vague warnings. Before he left, Ashley assisted him into the wheelchair as per hospital policy. James caught her gaze one last time. "Thank you for everything," he said sincerely. "Your care has meant more than you know." Ashley's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Please be careful, Mr. Thomas, and if you need anything, don't hesitate to call. I'll be here." As James was wheeled into the bustling streets of Washington, D.C., the crisp autumn air and clamor of the city assaulted his senses. His chauffeur, Thomas, greeted him with a steady hand. "Good to see you out and about," Sir Thomas said as he helped James into the back of the sleek black sedan. "Thank you, Thomas," James replied, settling into the plush leather seat. "Take me to the office. We have a lot to address." The car wove through the chaotic streets, and James's thoughts fixated on the upcoming board meeting. Unbeknownst to him, a storm of revelations awaited secrets that would shake the very foundation of everything he had built. The Washington skyline loomed ahead, its towering structures a fitting metaphor for the challenges awaiting him. James Thomas, the determined titan of industry, was about to embark on the most pivotal journey of his life, a journey that would not only test his business acumen, but would also force him to confront truths about his past he had long buried. As the car rolled on, James braced himself for the unknown battles ahead, unaware that Ashley Thomas, the unassuming nurse, had just become the key to unlocking a mystery that would forever change his life. The sleek black sedan navigated through the vibrant streets of Washington, D.C., its tinted windows concealing James Thomas from the bustling world outside. Inside, the seasoned CEO of Joint Stock reclined against the luxurious leather seat, his eyes closed in a vain attempt to summon the strength he needed for the day ahead. Thomas, his loyal chauffeur of over 15 years, cast a worried glance through the rearview mirror. "Sir, are you certain about this? Perhaps taking a day to rest at home would be wiser." James's eyes opened, his piercing gaze radiating the unyielding resolve that had defined his career. "Thank you for your concern, Thomas, but I don't have the luxury of time. Joint Stock needs me now more than ever." As the car wove through the chaotic traffic, James's thoughts churned with unease. Ashley's whispered warning lingered in his mind, her words unsettling him more than he cared to admit. What did she mean, he wondered, his brow furrowing. Why would it be dangerous for me to attend my own board meeting? The sedan came to a smooth stop before the towering glass and steel edifice of Joint Stock's headquarters. The modern building gleamed in the late morning sunlight, its facade a symbol of power and progress. James inhaled deeply, bracing himself for the day's challenges. Reaching for the door handle, a sudden wave of dizziness swept over him, forcing him to pause. It was an unwelcome reminder of the health scare that had recently upended his life. Sir Thomas's voice broke through the moment, tinged with genuine concern. James shook his head dismissively, a hand lightly gripping the armrest. "I'm fine, Thomas. Just a fleeting spell. Nothing to worry about." Adjusting his tie with a steady hand, he stepped out of the car, his posture exuding confidence, though a trace of doubt lingered beneath the surface. Standing before the entrance of Joint Stock, James gazed up at the skyscraper that symbolized his life's work. Each pane of reflective glass, each steel beam, represented years of sacrifice, ambition, and unrelenting drive. Whatever this is, he thought, his jaw tightening, I'll face it head on. The doors of the building slid open, welcoming him into the marble-floored lobby, where the hum of morning activity played out in rhythmic precision. Employees nodded respectfully as he passed, their admiration evident. Yet James felt an undercurrent of tension in the air, a subtle shift he couldn't quite place. As he strode toward the elevator, his thoughts returned to Ashley Thomas. Her warning was not the idle concern of an inexperienced nurse. It carried weight, a subtle urgency he couldn't shake. Why did she seem so certain? He questioned silently, his hand hovering over the elevator button. The doors opened with a soft chime, and he stepped inside, his reflection staring back at him in the polished metal walls. Adjusting his stance, he straightened his back, silently willing the discomfort to subside. James Thomas was not a man who allowed doubt to cloud his focus, but as the elevator ascended toward the boardroom, a flicker of uncertainty shadowed his thoughts. The path ahead would demand more than sharp instincts and strategy. It would require strength, resolve, and the answers to questions he hadn't yet dared to ask. As James Thomas strode through the grand lobby of Joint Stock, employees paused mid-step, their eyes widening in shock and curiosity. Faces around him reflected a mixture of surprise and relief, whispers rippling through the air like an undercurrent of doubt. "Is that Mr. Thomas?" one voice asked softly. "I thought he was still recovering," another murmured, concern etched in their tone. "He doesn't look well. Should he even be here?" James paid no attention to the low chatter, his focus unshaken as he walked with purpose. He offered a brief, sharp nod to the security guard stationed at the desk and stepped confidently into the private elevator that would carry him to the executive floor. As the elevator began its smooth ascent, James leaned against the wall, his eyes closing momentarily. He took a deep breath, allowing himself a fleeting moment to recenter. In his mind, he pictured the board meeting ahead, visualizing every detail falling into place with precision. This technique mental rehearsal had been his go-to strategy for years, fueling his ability to lead with unwavering composure. The elevator doors opened silently, revealing the pristine elegance of the executive floor. The soft carpeting muffled his footsteps, and the sleek lines of modern art adorning the walls created a quiet air of authority. Ashley, his sharp-eyed assistant, caught sight of him as he stepped into the corridor. Her reaction was immediate. She nearly dropped the tablet she'd been clutching, her composure faltering for the first time in memory. "Mr. Thomas," she exclaimed, hurrying toward him. "We weren't expecting you back so soon." James gave her a faint, reassuring smile. "It takes more than a health scare to keep me down, Ashley. Now, is everything set for the board meeting?" Ashley nodded quickly, falling into step beside him as they moved toward his office. "Yes, sir. The reports have been finalized, and all the board members have been informed of your return. But, sir," she hesitated, glancing at him with genuine concern, "are you sure this is a good idea? You're still recovering. We could reschedule if needed." James stopped mid-stride, his voice firm and unyielding. "No rescheduling, Ashley. This meeting is critical to Joint Stock's future. I've spent decades building this company, and I won't let a few days in the hospital derail our progress. Now," he added, resuming his pace, "catch me up on everything I've missed." As they entered his office, the familiar scent of polished wood and leather wrapped around him like a comforting embrace. The space exuded power and control, reflecting the man who had built his empire brick by brick. Yet for the first time, James felt a faint tremor of unease. Ashley's concern wasn't unfounded, and deep down, he knew the stakes of this meeting went beyond the usual challenges of corporate politics. James settled into his chair, his sharp gaze fixed on Ashley as she began to outline the details of recent developments. He listened intently, his mind cataloging every piece of information, while the weight of Ashley's earlier hesitation lingered in the air. This wasn't just another meeting. James could feel it in his gut. Something was brewing. The whispers of warning he had brushed aside were beginning to echo louder, demanding his attention. But James Thomas was not one to shy away from a storm. Whatever awaited him in the boardroom, he would face it head-on. As Emily began her detailed update, James Thomas sank back into his chair, its worn leather creaking softly beneath him. He glanced over the neatly arranged documents on his polished desk, his sharp gaze quickly skimming their contents. While everything appeared to be in order, a nagging sense of unease tugged at him like a faint shadow hovering just beyond his line of sight. A firm knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Joseph Sullivan, his loyal chief operating officer and friend of over 2 decades, stepped into the room. A warm smile spread across Joseph's face as he approached James. "James, it's so good to see you back," Joseph exclaimed, clasping James's hand in both of his. "We've all been worried about you. Are you sure you're ready for this meeting?" James studied his friend's face carefully, searching for any trace of the threat Ashley had hinted at during his stay in the hospital. All he could discern was genuine concern etched into Joseph's features. "I'm fine," James replied with a reassuring tone. "A bit worn out, maybe, but nothing I can't manage. Now, catch me up what's really going on here. I feel like there's more to this than meets the eye." Joseph's confident demeanor faltered for a brief second, so fleeting that James might have missed it if he weren't paying close attention. "Everything's under control," Joseph said smoothly. "We've kept things on track while you were away. There were a few hiccups, but nothing we couldn't handle." James leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Joseph. "Hiccups? What kind of hiccups?" Before Joseph could respond, Emily, James's capable assistant, appeared at the doorway, her expression composed. "Mr. Thomas, the board members are starting to arrive. The meeting is set to begin in 10 minutes. James nodded, rising from his chair with deliberate steadiness. "We'll pick this up later, Joseph. For now, let's address the board." As James and Joseph walked side by side toward the expansive conference room, James's mind whirred with thoughts. Ashley's cryptic warning, Joseph's subtle hesitation, and other minute details that most would dismiss it all added up to something James couldn't ignore. His finely tuned instincts, honed by years of navigating high-stakes corporate landscapes, told him he was on the brink of something significant. The conference room itself was a monument to the grandeur of joint stock success. A long, imposing mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by plush leather chairs that seemed to exude authority. Towering floor-to-ceiling windows showcased an awe-inspiring view of Washington, D.C., the bustling city below, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere inside. As James stepped into the room, conversations hushed, and the board members stood, their surprise evident. James exclaimed Elena Winters, the most senior board member and one of James's earliest supporters. Her voice was a mixture of astonishment and concern. "We didn't expect to see you today." "I have to ask," Elena continued, her brow furrowed slightly, "are you sure this is wise? You've just come out of the hospital. Shouldn't you be resting?" James offered a faint but confident smile as he moved to his seat at the head of the table. His commanding presence filled the room, even as he acknowledged their concern. "Thank you, Elena, and thank you all for your worry," James said, his voice steady yet measured. "But joint stock is my life's work, and this meeting is far too important to delay." The board members exchanged uncertain glances, but ultimately nodded in agreement. James could feel their hesitation, and while it didn't deter him, it heightened his awareness. He sensed that the challenges ahead were far greater than the usual corporate politics. As James sat down and opened his folder of meticulously prepared notes, the nurse's ominous warning echoed in his mind. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure: he would face whatever came next with the same tenacity that had built his empire. James Thomas leaned back slightly in his chair, flashing his most reassuring smile at Elena Winters, the board's longest-serving and most respected member. "Elena, I appreciate your concern," he said smoothly. "But I assure you I'm perfectly capable of handling today's meeting. Shall we get started?" As the meeting unfolded, James found himself attuned to the subtle undercurrents in the room. Every sidelong glance, every hushed whisper, seemed to carry a weight he couldn't ignore. He noticed how several board members deferred to Joseph Sullivan, more than usual, a shift that pricked at his instincts. The exchange of small nods and the occasional flicker of unspoken agreement between certain members didn't escape his sharp gaze. Midway through Joseph's presentation on Joinstock's quarterly performance, something unexpected caught James's eye. Reflected in the polished window behind Joseph was a document held on the lap of Adam Boyd, one of the more enigmatic board members. The logo at the top of the page was all too familiar: Global Communications, the corporation's most aggressive rival. James's pulse quickened. What was a Global Communications document doing in this room? His mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to align. Ashley's cryptic warning, Joseph's hesitations, and now this an undeniable sign of something far more sinister brewing beneath the surface. Joseph James interjected abruptly, his voice cutting through the meeting's rhythm like a blade. The suddenness of his tone commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Let's pivot for a moment. I'd like to discuss the Morrison contract, the one we've been negotiating for over a month. Joseph paused, his expression momentarily clouded with confusion. The Morrison contract? I wasn't aware that was on today's agenda, James. Indulge me, James replied coolly, his eyes methodically scanning the room. From the corner of his vision, he saw Adam subtly shift in his chair, his hand moving to shield the incriminating document. Around the table, other board members began to shift uneasily, the atmosphere growing heavier by the second. Joseph cleared his throat, clearly buying time. Well, as far as I'm aware, negotiations are ongoing. Our team remains confident that we can finalize the contract within the next. That's fascinating, James interrupted, his voice lowering to a razor-sharp edge, because as of this morning, I received word that Morrison has signed with Global Communications. Not just agreed, but finalized. 3 days ago, in fact, while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the kind that seemed to magnify every creak of a chair and every breath drawn. The weight of James's words landed heavily, leaving no room for pretense. Eyes darted nervously around the table, some avoiding James's piercing gaze altogether. Adam Boyd visibly stiffened, clutching the document on his lap, as though it might disappear under scrutiny. James sat back, his tone measured but unyielding. Would anyone care to explain how such a significant deal slipped through our fingers? Or perhaps why a competitor's document would find its way into our boardroom? The air seemed to thicken with tension, every second feeling like an eternity as James's questions hung unanswered in the room. James Thomas rose slowly from his chair, his hands pressing firmly against the smooth surface of the mahogany table. His piercing gaze traveled deliberately from one board member to the next, each person avoiding his eyes as though the weight of his fury might pin them in place. Now he began, his voice calm yet brimming with restrained intensity. I will ask this only once. I expect nothing less than the truth. What exactly has been happening during my absence? The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Around the table, nervous glances darted like shadows, no one daring to speak first. Finally, it was Elena Winters, the seasoned board member whose loyalty James had never questioned, who broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, yet laden with unease. James, you have to understand, she said, her words deliberate and heavy. We were trying to act in the best interests of Joinstock. Your health scare forced us to confront the vulnerabilities in our leadership structure. We felt we had no choice but to explore alternatives. Alternatives, James's jaw tightened, his voice dropping into a sharp edge, and those alternatives included negotiating with our largest competitor. Joseph Sullivan stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. His usually confident demeanor was noticeably shaken. James, it's not what you think, Joseph insisted, his tone almost pleading. Let us explain. The situation isn't as black and white as it seems. But James had heard enough. The raw sting of betrayal was unbearable, made worse by the fact that it came from individuals he had trusted implicitly. He stood taller, the authority in his presence filling the room. "This meeting is over," he declared, his tone leaving no room for debate. "I expect comprehensive reports detailing every single decision made during my absence on my desk within the hour. Effective immediately, all board members are suspended until a full investigation has been conducted." The weight of his words hung in the air as the board members began to shuffle out of the room, some with faces flushed in shame, others masking their emotions with stoic defiance. James remained at the head of the table, the room emptying around him. He stood motionless, his thoughts churning with a mix of anger, disappointment, and a steely resolve. The quiet hum of the conference room felt deafening as he stared out the window at the Washington, D.C. skyline. The betrayal had shaken him, but it would not break him. The Washington, D.C. skyline stretched out before James Thomas, a vista he had once viewed as his kingdom. Now it loomed as a reminder of how fragile power could be, how quickly empires could falter. With a steady hand, James pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he landed on the number of his personal attorney. As the line connected, his thoughts drifted back to the hospital, the sterile room, the rhythmic hum of medical monitors, and the nurse with the penetrating, familiar gaze. Ashley. Her name echoed in his mind like a riddle begging to be solved. She had warned him, spoken with urgency and conviction about a danger he couldn't yet see. How had she known, and why had she risked so much to caution him? The attorney's voice finally broke through his reverie. James began outlining the series of events that had spiraled out of his control, each word calculated, though tinged with an undertone of disbelief at the betrayal he had uncovered. Yet, even as he laid out the facts, his mind remained partially elsewhere, fixated on the enigma of Ashley. He made a silent vow. He would find her, uncover how she had come to know so much about the threat to him and join stock. But deep down, James sensed this wasn't just a matter of business. There was something more, a connection he couldn't yet explain. Unbeknownst to him, the search for Ashley would unravel secrets far more profound than corporate espionage. These revelations would strike at the very foundation of his existence, shaking his perception of family, trust, and identity. As he ended the call, James stood silently by the window, staring at the city below. The skyscrapers seemed to shimmer with unspoken promises and lurking shadows. He inhaled deeply, steeling himself for what was to come. James Thomas stood on the cusp of a journey that would redefine not just his business legacy, but his entire life. The stage was set. What lay ahead would demand every ounce of his resolve, testing him in ways he could never have imagined. The late afternoon sun poured into James Thomas's office, casting elongated shadows across the polished hardwood floors. He moved restlessly, his pacing a reflection of the turmoil within. The weight of the recent revelations pressed down on him, each step echoing the gravity of what had been unearthed. The betrayal by his trusted board members and the covert collusion with global communications felt more like the plot of an intricate conspiracy novel than the reality of his meticulously constructed empire. For a man who thrived on control and precision, the chaos now encircling him was profoundly unsettling. James came to a stop by the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, his gaze falling on the familiar skyline of Washington, D.C. Once this view had embodied his success, the city, a vibrant symbol of ambition, power, and the victories he had claimed over the years. But now it seemed to taunt him, reminding him how quickly even the mightiest of foundations could falter. He pressed a hand against the cool glass, his reflection staring back with an expression he barely recognized, one of exhaustion mingled with disbelief. This city, which had always stood for resilience and opportunity, now felt like a fragile web, where even the slightest disturbance could send it unraveling. James's mind raced as he turned away from the view, retreating to his desk. The familiar weight of his chair felt oddly comforting as he sank into it, though the turmoil in his thoughts remained unchecked. He reached for a legal pad, instinctively beginning to jot down possible next steps, strategies, and countermeasures, but the pen hovered, unable to commit words to the page. This wasn't just a corporate setback, it was personal. The betrayal, the collusion, it cut far deeper than dollars or deals. And somewhere, tangled in the chaos, lay Ashley's cryptic warning, a thread he hadn't yet pulled but knew he must. James exhaled, his eyes closing briefly. The city outside continued its rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing within its walls. For a man who had built his career on turning obstacles into opportunities, James Thomas was about to face a challenge unlike any he had encountered before, a battle that would test not only his acumen but also his heart. The sun dipped lower, the shadows in his office growing longer. The city's lights began to twinkle, a reminder that the world outside carried on, indifferent to his personal struggles. But James wasn't indifferent. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, and resolved himself to the fight ahead. Whatever lay beyond this betrayal, whatever truths remained hidden, he would uncover them, no matter the cost. James Thomas loosened his tie, the weight of the day's revelations pressing heavily on him. He stared out at the Washington, D.C. skyline, the familiar sight offering little comfort in the face of what he had just uncovered. A soft knock at the door broke his brooding silence. "Come in," he said, his voice steady despite the storm within. Emily, his steadfast assistant, stepped in tentatively. She held a stack of neatly bound reports, her expression a mix of professionalism and concern. "Mr. Thomas, I've gathered the documents you requested from the board members, and John is on line 1. He's ready to brief you." James nodded, finally turning to face her. The usual spark in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a weariness he rarely showed. "Thank you, Emily. Once this call is over, hold everything else. I need to think." With a respectful nod, Emily exited the room, closing the door softly behind her. James picked up the phone, bracing himself for what he knew would be difficult to hear. "John, tell me what you found," he said, his tone firm but laced with apprehension. The familiar gravelly voice of John Pearson, his longtime legal counsel, came through the receiver. "James, I won't sugarcoat it. The situation is worse than we suspected. There's strong evidence of a coordinated effort to undermine your control at joint stock. The board has been in discussions with Global Communications for quite some time, weeks, maybe even months." James's jaw tightened as his free hand balled into a fist. He had suspected treachery, but hearing it confirmed sent a surge of anger coursing through him. "And David?" he asked, his voice cold, as if daring the answer to be anything less than the truth. John hesitated, the pause heavy with unspoken implications. "David appears to be the linchpin. He's been orchestrating most of the moves behind your back." "I'm sorry, James. I know how close you two were." The word struck James like a physical blow. David Sullivan wasn't just his chief operating officer. He had been a trusted ally, a friend through triumphs and challenges. Together they had built joint stock from a fledgling idea into a corporate powerhouse. The betrayal felt personal, a knife twisted into the deepest part of his trust. "What do we do now?" James asked, the edge in his voice betraying his effort to remain composed. "We need to act swiftly," John replied. "I'm filing injunctions to halt any unauthorized transactions. We'll call an emergency shareholders meeting, lay out our evidence, and push to have the rogue board members removed. It won't be easy, but the law is on your side." James nodded, though John couldn't see him. "Whatever it takes. I won't let them dismantle everything Barbara and I worked for." As the call ended, James leaned back in his chair, the gravity of the situation settling heavily on him. The office, usually his sanctuary, felt oppressive in its silence. He closed his eyes, drawing in slow, measured breaths in an attempt to steady his racing thoughts. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. David had been more than a colleague, he had been family in all but blood. Now, James found himself questioning every shared moment, every handshake, every plan they had charted together.